So I'm very happy that she's also here, at least in our soul. So space resource activities or space resource law is not the most famous field of law in Central Europe. However, in my opinion, space resource law is mostly in the interest of the countries who are not spacefaring countries. So, for example, it has a lot of applications for Central European countries. So today I will try to introduce you what I've been researching in the past couple of months. So I will be talking about how extraterrestrial resources are influencing the European Union and what it means to less developed spacefaring countries such as Hungary or the Central European countries. So as an introduction, I would like to begin with the fact that most armed conflicts, both in the past and in the future, currently, are revolving around conflicts over either resources or territories. And one of the most important goals of the Outer Space Treaty or Outer Space Law was to prevent the countries to claim territorial sovereignty over outer space itself or its resources. So what we can say is that the most important goal of the outer space law is to prevent territorial claims over these resources. However, in recent years, you could also hear about this in the news, but outer space is not only about states, but a lot of very rich people started to develop their space activities. There are a lot of companies who are interested in mining or get space resources because, as you could read on the slide, the first trillionaire there will ever be is the person who exploits the natural resources on asteroids. So what I'm dealing with, or what we are dealing with here, is the space resource law, which by definition is the collection of principles and rules that govern how humanity interacts, extracts, and distributes materials found beyond Earth. However, I think we've already mentioned, or at least Barbara already mentioned, that there are a lot of different types of resources. There are mineral resources, water, ice could also be considered as resource, but solar energy is also some type of resource, space resource. There are orbital positions, radio frequencies, which I think Rosa is also going to be talking about. And what we must also notice that there are a lot of finite resources which are already managed. So ITU regulates frequencies and orbital slots, but there are other abundant resources too. And what I also wanted to highlight is that space resource activities have already been happening. It's not a futuristic thing. So in 1969, the Apollo mission's main goal was to bring back lunar soil on Earth. So it's not something so futuristic. It already has happened, but in a different scale. So let's talk a little bit about the European Union. We know that the European Union has always been an important player in outer space. However, the European Commission noticed that European Union is lagging behind. And on June 15th, it published two different documents. One of them was the European Space Act, which mainly focuses to establish a single market approach or to address the fragmentation of national legislations. However, we often forget about the other document, which is called the Vision for European Space Economy. This looks further ahead, and its main goal is to make a strategy which will help European Union to be the global leader of space economy by 2050. And it also highlights the fact that if European Union wants to be a leader in space economy, it must address the legal issues of space resource activities. So it has a specific chapter on space mining and space resource utilization. And it's a quote, but it says that the Commission is committed to analyzing what kind of legal framework is most appropriate for governing space resource use. So this is what I'm going to be researching within this 15 minutes or the remaining time. Because if the European Union could solve the issues of space resource activities or the legal questions of space resource activities, then we would have a unique voice to present on a global level. But what are the regulatory problems? I think we've already mentioned most of them, so I just rush through it. But we must remember that there's not a single global framework existing which governs outer space resources. So there are competing legal models. There are international treaties and soft law instruments. There are political and voluntary instruments. There are regional instruments. There are national legislations. And there are also some guidelines which could be considered as additional soft law instruments. But what does the Outer Space Treaty say? So the golden rule of outer space law is the freedom of use and exploration. So what this means is that there's a general freedom of activities. But in order to legally use or explore outer space, you must comply with the following rules, which are on the slide, but I'm not going to be reading it because, I mean, it's important. But regarding our topic, the second article is more important, which says that outer space cannot be claimed by sovereignty. And if you think back in the beginning, this was the most important goal of the Outer Space Treaty, to prevent wars. Because if you cannot claim sovereignty over outer space, then there are not going to be territorial disputes. However, the question still remains whether this non-appropriation principle applies to the resources of the celestial bodies themselves, and what about commercial resource use? So there are two prevailing views regarding this. One view is the permissive view, which says that outer space is similar to the high seas, because if you're going there in conformity of international law, something like fishing, if you catch fishes, the fishes in your net are going to be yours, and you can use these resources for your own benefit. On the other hand, for example, Russia specifically said that it's completely illegal and it runs counter to international law. On the other hand, there's another view which says that space resources, or to extract these resources and use it for commercial purposes, is only legal if it complies with the common heritage of mankind principle. And it comes from the Moon Agreement. This is the only legal agreement which explicitly attempts to regulate space resource activities. It declares that Moon and its natural resources are common heritage of mankind, and it actually allows resources to be owned, but only if it complies with the principle of common heritage of mankind, which is a very strict regime, because it tries to establish and ensure equitable benefit sharing regarding the resources. And what's going to be very important is that even though that it's not a commonly accepted regime, Austria, Belgium, and Netherlands have ratified it within the EU, and France and Romania has signed it. So it will have even more complications within the European Union. We already mentioned the Artemis Accords, as Güneş also said, and as Bodur has mentioned, it's a political agreement. However, it has a specific principle on resource extraction, and it allows private companies to maintain ownership over these resources. What's also important is that there are actually 4 existing national space legislations. One of them has already been introduced. The other one is going to be introduced by Yangtze, but its legality is really debated. So, for example, Russia specifically said that these issues must be resolved within the United Nations, and actually Belgium, who is a signature of the Moon Agreement, argues that this is illegal because this is an extension of national jurisdiction over outer space. So now we are going to go to Luxembourg, and in Luxembourg we are having the second in the world and first in the European Union. This is the first dedicated space mining law in the world, and it states that space resources are capable of being owned. And this small country became the hub for space mining companies, so it attracted a lot of investment. However, in my opinion, especially in the light of the EU Space Act, it will create a lot of controversies. So what is happening here? Because it has real implications for the whole European Union. In my opinion, if these resources are capable of being owned legally under the Luxembourg law, their subsequent importation and movement within the EU single market could create conflicts of law. So we have the member states who dispute the legality of international resource appropriation, and there are a lot of member states within the European Union who don't even have opinion about space resources. So the problem is becoming more and more highlighted, especially regarding the EU Space Act, which says that there must be mutual recognition of licenses. So if Luxembourg gives a license to one company, this license must be recognized under all EU members if it complies with the regulations of the new EU Space Act. So what it means is that this single legislation binds the rest of the EU through internal market law, and it again creates fragmentation of law, which was the most important goal to destroy with the EU Space Act. So once again, if you legally extract space resources under Luxembourg law and you releasing it for free circulation within Luxembourg, it would lawfully be in circulation in other member states, and it must be treated as EU goods, which is again a question and a controversy. So I don't know what is happening here actually, but I was thinking about what's the best solution to, or how could we regulate space resource activities. And okay, actually, there was a table here, and it was very nice, but no, it's not. It doesn't work. But I can introduce you to this. So I was trying to show that a multi-level governance system is appropriate to regulate these. What I meant under this system is that, first of all, we don't necessarily need legal rules to regulate these activities. What we need is a broader system of rules, not necessarily legal. It could be political, which includes informal guidelines, practices, managing and directing activities. So I created a 5-level governance system. First of all, I'd imagine international rules within the UN or the draft principles of space resource activities, which would introduce high-level and general principles with flexibility. And under that, there would be a second level of regulation, which would be the political or like-minded countries would come together and regulate space resource activities. It could be the Artemis Accords or the Chinese-Russian lunar exploration project. And on the third level, I imagined an intermediate level, which would be the EU Act, which has only broad principles, and it harmonizes standards, ensures data sharing, and prevents fragmentation of the EU space market. Because on the fourth level, I imagined that the EU would allow national or nations to create their own national space legislation, regarding space resource activities. However, it would have been guarded by harmonized EU rules. And on the fifth level, there are the soft law or expert guidance level instruments. And together, in my opinion, this would create a predictable approach to space resource extraction or space resource activities. It would be flexible, and in this way, there would be no legal gaps anymore regarding space resource activities. So, okay. So, as a conclusion for the Central European region, I would say that the Luxembourg Space Resource Act really shows that even a small nation can shape EU and global space governance. And if we want to avoid repeating the same colonial or territorial mistakes which we have done on Earth, then we should allow all nations to have a voice in shaping the rules, which would mean that even the Central European countries should at least somehow engage in space resource diplomacy. And this is why space resource law is very unique, because it lets every single nation to have a voice, because it concerns not only just the spacefaring countries, but the shared interest of future of the humanity. So this is why I'm saying that there should be a multi-level governance system, because there's not a single solution which is sufficient to regulate space resource activities. So again, there should be EU law, national law, international treaties, and soft law guidance. And with this, I'm thanking you for your attention, and that was all I could present. Thank you.